We're going to be picking up in Matthew chapter 9, and we're picking up in where we left off in verse 18. So this was 2 weeks ago. And just for a quick recap, so that we're all familiar with where we left off. In Matthew chapter 9, up until here, this has been Jesus kind of coming back towards his hometown, and he's doing all these miracles. There's been crazy things happening. Started with the centurion. As soon as he walked into the town, the centurion's servant was sick, and he said, "Look, I'm a man of authority. You're a man of authority. Just say the word, and it'll be done." And Jesus was impressed by this man's faith. He had never seen faith like it. And he said as much, and then it says that the man's servant was healed that very hour. And we just see these miracles after miracles after miracles that have been going on. And then we ended last week with the teaching where he was talking about the old and new wineskins. We talked about how what Jesus was alluding to was showing us that the old promise, the old covenant, while it was good, was not sufficient for what was about to come. And that something else had to happen, and there was going to be a new covenant being made. Right? And of course, this must have sounded like gobbledygook to a bunch of them because they were unaware that a new covenant was going to be coming, right? We obviously have the benefit of 2,000 years of history to look back and see what happened and know what's going on. And so we can see that we know that Jesus Christ died on the cross. We know that he was buried, and we know that he rose on the third day. And so after he had finished teaching about this, it says here in verse 18, while he was saying this, a synagogue leader came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter just died, but come and put your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus got up, went with him, and so did his disciples. I'm going to pause right there just for a moment for this one particular reason, because I feel like this is a frequent thing. We say that all of the Jewish leadership seem to be against Jesus, and I want us to remember, this is a leader of the synagogue. And I've often heard it taught this way too. And they'll say, "Oh, in one moment he was fine criticizing Jesus, and now he's coming against him." I want to ask you, of all of the people following Jesus, they all had one thing in common. Do you know what that one thing in common was? They were Jewish. Every single one of them. Many of them were commoners, but a lot of them were actually part of what would have been seen as the order of the Pharisees or in the leadership of these synagogues. Although sometimes we present this as so strange that a leader of a synagogue would do this, just because he saw it, right? He was able to witness it. He saw it for himself. He realized, he knew what the teachings taught. He knew what the scriptures said. He knew what Hosea had taught, what Isaiah had taught, what Malachi had taught. He knew what they were waiting for. He knew that the Messiah was going to come. And when he saw Jesus, he put his faith in the scriptures and in this man who was living out exactly what they had said. And I want us to keep this in mind because this is going to be kind of the crux about what's going on here today. Verse 20, just then a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. And she said to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed." And Jesus turned and saw her. "Take heart, daughter," he said. "Your faith has healed you." And the woman was healed at that moment. Now, many of us are much more familiar with the much more expanded part of the story that was written down in, I think, both in Mark and in John, where and for those of you who went with us to see the movie King of Kings, you'll remember they did this very scene in the movie. And I think this is often how people imagine it in their minds, where there's this huge crowd of people, and they're all pressing in on Jesus, and they all want to see the teacher, see the healer, see what wonderful things he's going to do. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we have this moment where Jesus goes, "Who touched me?" Right? We read this in the other accounts, and I believe in John, he kind of expands on this particular story, and he says, "Then Jesus said, 'Who touched me?' And of course, the disciples are looking around. It's like there's people pressing in from all around. What do you mean, who touched you? A lot of people touched you. But Jesus had this moment where he's like, no, I need to know, who is this one person? Who was this one individual, this one woman? And then here in Matthew, it says he turns, he sees her, and he says, "Take heart, daughter, your faith, your trust in Jesus, in the Lord, has healed you." Let's keep that in mind. When Jesus entered the synagogue leader's house, he saw a noisy crowd, People were playing pipes, and he said, "Go away, the girl's not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him, and after the crowds had been put outside, he went in, he took the girl by the hand, and she got up, and news of this spread through all of the region. And, okay, so this actually goes to what actually kind of was happening here as some of you were coming in this morning. We were talking about differences in culture because Michelle had made the comment about something being fresh. And if you're not from Newfoundland, you're like, what's wrong with being fresh? She said it in a negative way. Oh, it's too fresh. And you're like, what's the problem? But that's because in a different culture, in Newfoundland, it means not salty enough, right? And we're all like, oh yeah, no, I get that. It's not good. And I think this same thing kind of happens here a lot of times when people read the Bible, is we're missing the cultural context about what's actually happening in this moment. So you go, wait a minute, why would Jesus put these people outside? If there are people here and this little girl died, mustn't they be there because they're people who love and care about this little girl, and they too would want to see this miracle? But that's the thing. That's not what was happening in this moment. See, in their culture, in their context, these people were actually professional mourners. They got paid to go around and mourn the death of people. Because it was one of the requirements in the law that, again, the Pharisees kind of dialed up to 11. It was one of the requirements of the law that, people didn't just pass away unrecognized, but instead you would play the flute and you would have and by the weeping and mourning and people with their sackcloth and ashes, they would know that someone had passed. But then it got to the point where as people became more and more wealthy, and it was a real show of affluence and how well off someone was, they would hire people to come, and there would be a great band come out, and there'd be people coming, and they would sob and cry and scream. And that's why when it says, so this crowd that they're talking about, this crowd of people, they're not actually there for the little girl. They don't care about the little girl at all. They're there because they're getting paid. And so Jesus puts them out and says, no, you're not to be here. And after he puts them up, he walks over to the little girl who's asleep. Remember this term. He walks over and he extends his hand. He just offers her his hand and says, come on, get up. And she gets up. Again, remember we talked about this when Jesus calmed the storm, right? Jesus didn't plead with the storm. Jesus didn't say magic words. Jesus said, stop, and it stopped. And here, once again, the author of life, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, all he has to do to reverse death is extend his hand and say, come on. He gives an order, he gives direction, and it is followed. Verse 27, as Jesus went on from there, right? So can you imagine how chaotic this must be for Jesus? And we know that it's much more chaotic than this because, as John told us, if we wrote down every single thing that Jesus did, there wouldn't be enough scrolls on the planet for us to write down everything he did. But here it is. He's just trying to move around the city. And it says, as he went on from there, 2 blind men followed him, calling out, have mercy on us, son of David. Now, what was son of David a recognition of? It was a recognition that he was from that line, the line of the Messiah. They are calling out and calling him the Messiah, the one that they've been waiting for, the deliverer, the one who is going to be the new Moses, the one who's going to be Elijah, the one who has come in that power in order to save them, liberate them, and free them from the bondage that they are currently in. They call out, have mercy on us, son of David. And when he went indoors, Jesus, the blind man came to him and he asked, do you believe that I'm able to do this? Yes, Lord, they replied. Then he touched their eyes and said this, according to your faith, let it be done to you. And then their sight was restored. Jesus warned them sternly, see that no one knows about this, but they went out and spread the news about him all over the region. Once again, we see that word pop up again. It was about faith. Here's the thing, the reason that this story was written down, quite frankly, is because we know the blind men were healed. But I imagine there were probably times where Jesus, he probably went to perform the same thing, and he went up and he touched them, and they didn't have it restored. And why would that be? Because it wasn't about him. He said, it's according to your faith. Do you believe it will happen? Do you put your trust in the Messiah? Do you put your trust in Jesus? Or are you just coming for the carnival trick? Are you just coming because you want to see some performance happen? Or are you actually trying to get connected with the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords? But so then all this is still happening, and then they're going out, and there's another man. This man was demon-possessed, and he could not talk. He was brought to Jesus. When the demon was driven out, the man that had been mute spoke. The crowd was amazed. Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel. But the Pharisee said, "It is by the prince of demons that he drives out demons." Once again, we see an act of trust, an act of faith, recognizing the authority that Jesus has. Because here's the thing, friends. The law. Do we believe that the law here in Canada has authority over us? No one does. Okay, got a couple yeses then. Okay, how many of you exceeded 80 kilometers an hour on your way here today? No, I didn't drive. How many of you in town exceeded 40? Right? See, the fact of the matter is that the law and all this stuff, and I always bring it up to this because it's kind of like a small example, but it's a real example, in that we don't really put that much trust in the law. Sometimes we'll say, like, especially things like speed limits. In fact, it's gotten so bad in Ontario, the reason they've lowered the limit to 40 is because they realized when we had it at 50, which was reasonable in town, people were exceeding it even higher. So if we lower it, then they'll only exceed it to the limit where we originally want them to be, which is not a good way of setting it up, by the way. The rule's either the rule or it's not the rule, right? The law is either the law or it's not the law, right? Either we trust in Jesus and we trust in what he says and when he says, look, this is how it's supposed to be, then we got to trust that that's how it's supposed to be. We don't say to Jesus, well, I only broke your law a little bit. I only violated what you set out before me and the terms that you gave to me a little bit, so I should be excused, right? It was only 9 kilometers an hour, although that does work in Ontario. But you see what I mean? The law is only the law if there is something to enforce it. And the fact of the matter is that when Jesus lays this out, he's laying out a consistent thing for us to understand, that if we want to see change in our life, if we want to see transformation, if we want to see radical miracles, then the key is it starts with faith. Where do you put your trust? And this is key because he's going to break into why this is so important, why we need to have our faith. Because at the end of the day, faith in Jesus is good, but as James tells us, faith without works is dead. It's no good. What's the point? What is the point? And here's a great example. A bunch of us here are millennials, and we can all attest to this. What good is a university degree that we do not use? I say millennials because a lot of millennials got college. I have a college diploma I don't use. A lot of us have either college diplomas or university degrees that are not used, but we had to pay a lot of money for. What good is it? What good is it that you have this qualification? What good is it if it's not being used? It's useless. It's only useful if we actually put it into action. Our faith in Jesus Christ is only good if we put it into action. And you might ask yourself, well, what action is that? And Jesus clears this up in verse 35. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, healing every disease and sickness. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. What's he mean? Well, let's think of it this way, because not many of us here are farmers. What does he mean when he says the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few? It means he's looking out and he's seeing these people hungry. He's seeing these people who want to have they want that relationship with God. They're curious. They want to know. They want to. They want to grow in that relationship. And we're seeing that more and more today too. Today, I think it has to do with the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, I feel like we took this real weird turn towards hedonism that clearly did not pay off, and then the society has gone through this weird identity crisis trying to work out what we're actually going to believe in. And what we're seeing now, especially with the younger generations, is a greater hunger than ever for religion. A greater hunger than ever for meaning, because they're watching their parents and and the kids ahead of them. They're watching these generations, both the millennials and the Gen Zs, not be able to work out what the heck is going on in their life. They have no meaning, no direction. They're just rudderless, drifting across the ocean. They want to know what their purpose is. They want to know who can lead them. The harvest is right there. But the workers are few. Who are the workers? The workers are the ones that are going to go out and actually bring them in. There's an old song, maybe some of you will remember this. Who remembers the song Bringing in the Sheaves? Yeah. Oh, I've heard of it, yeah. Yeah. It was it was a song about this very thing, about bringing in the harvest for the Lord, bringing in all those that are out there that are hungry, who are looking, who want to find Jesus, and they have a faith, but they're not sure where to place it. They're like, look, I know that there's a reason, I know that there's a purpose in my life, and I just need to know, where am I going to place this? Who am I to trust? Who am I to allow to guide me? And here's the thing. Quite frankly, Christianity is not the only option. Right? Let's face it. There are others out there. I'm not saying they're true. I'm not saying they're real. I'm not saying they're going to bring them fulfillment. But what I'm saying is there are others competing for that attention. When the Pharisees said about Jesus in verse 34, it is by the prince of demons that he drives out demons, this is because they were completely aware that the enemy is constantly working against you. He does not want you to be prosperous. He does not want you to find your purpose. He does not want you to find Jesus and understand that you too can be liberated, made free, made whole again. And maybe you ask yourself, whenever you read the Bible, maybe as you're going through the book of Matthew and you're reading these things, or you're reading through what happened in the book of Judges, or you're reading through what happens in other parts of the Bible, and you're asking yourself, wait a minute, why don't I see miracles like this in my life? Why don't I see miracles like this happening all around me at all times? And I would ask you, okay, where did you put your faith? Because it wasn't just by acts of Jesus, right? Like, Jesus showed up in these places, and people showed up and people talked to him, and Jesus was doing amazing things, and he was laying hands on people, and people were getting healed, and great things were happening. But as Jesus has been consistent to remind us as we go through and we complete this chapter, it's always been about an act of faith. It starts there. It starts with faith. It starts with putting your trust in Jesus, recognizing that he's the one that gives you purpose, recognizing he's the one that will liberate you from your bondage of sin and death. And by putting our trust in him, by letting him be the leader of our life, letting him be the Lord of our life, and submitting to him, then this is how we see real change, real transformation, and even miracles in our lives. I don't know about you, but I would love to see that for our world. Not because I think miracles save, because I don't think that. I think if you're not convinced by the preponderance of evidence that already exists, miracles aren't going to change your mind. Right? And I've brought up the example before about Christopher Hitchens, and I always loved that he was very honest about this. Because he made a quick comment, and he just said, if I saw it written in the sky, I am God and I am here, And he's like, that would convince me. And then he thought about it for a second. He's like, you know what? No, I wouldn't. I would just say, look, a skywriter did that or someone else. He was like, I would find a way to explain it away. I know I would. And he's right. Miracles don't change minds. Miracles reinforce your faith. But the faith has to come first. So where are you going to put your trust? Where are you going to put your hope in? I, for one, I'm going to continue to put my hope, put my trust, and put my faith in Jesus Christ, because he has shown me time and time and time again that he will be there. He will always be there. He will never abandon me. He will not forsake me, for he is good.